What's up, everybody, and welcome into another episode of Goal Line Dynasty Football. Today, going to be talking about some running backs. We're going to be talking about those middling guys like JK Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Miles Sanders. What are we doing with guys like that? So we've got about 5 or 6 trades to take a look at. Tyler and I are going to provide some commentary on those. But before we get into it, cannot talk today. Before we get into that, Tyler, how we doing, buddy?
Doing great today. Running backs are always tough to talk about. It's always a great day with you. I love your shirt as well. Great propaganda shirt. And I hope the viewers enjoy it. And I hope we can help some people out.
Exactly, man. Save the Death Star and save my Dynasty squad. So let's get into it. You like that pun. You can't see him because he's off screen. Tyler was drinking water. He gave me a smirk. It was great. Anyway, let's jump right on into the first one. We're going to talk about JK Dobbins. And JK Dobbins, for me, has been arguably one of my least favorite fantasy assets since he entered the league. I wasn't as high on him as other people were, and maybe that wasn't exactly justified, especially since his career has really only been derailed by injury, not really any fault of his own, but I digress. So, Tyler, let me ask you, which side are you taking in this trade? We got JK Dobbins and 108, and these are super flex, right? So JK Dobbins and 108 for Isaiah Pacheco and George Pickens.
For sure, Dobbins in the 108. I think Dobbins, for me, is above Pacheco still. And 108 clearly over Pickens for me. Not even a question. I know there's a lot of people who might argue that. But, yeah, for me, it's pretty easy Dobbins side. Dobbins and Pacheco are probably similar assets, and I think that 108 and Pickens are vastly different assets, if you ask me, especially in a super flex.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you. And usually it takes a lot for me to argue for the JK Dobbins side, but this just isn't enough. Isaiah Pacheco, he doesn't have – I mean, Pacheco is safe, and he's a lot of fun to root for because he's like the angriest running back in the entire league. Every time he touches the ball, you think it's the last time he'll ever touch that thing. So he's fun to root for. But I would rather have Dobbins in a 1-for-1 on my fantasy team. The reason being is Pacheco doesn't really have a ton of PPR upside. He's just kind of a bruising back on first and second down. J.K. Dobbins, kind of similar, but does have at least a little bit of PPR upside. Also, the Ravens are just a run-first offense, right? Whether it's Lamar, whether it's Dobbins, whether it's Gus Edwards, they like running the ball. There's going to be a lot of opportunity. And honestly, even if you gave me Pacheco, if you gave me Pacheco and Pickens, yeah, I'd sell Dobbins for that. But you don't need to add the 108 onto Dobbins in this case scenario. I would call this an even deal if the pick was like 204 or something like that. I think the 108 is way overkill. I agree with you completely. In the mock draft that you and I did the other day, 108 was who was 108? I think it was Will Levis. Will Levis fell to 108, or it was either him or Charbonnet, one of those guys. Either way, 108 is fantastic value to add into this. So I'm taking the Dobbins side all day.
Yeah, and I think if you replace the 108 with the 204, I'd call it even. I think if you replace like George Pickens with I think you replace him with like Jameson Williams, that would probably be fair for me there. If you replace him with Treylon Burks, I would probably take the Pacheco side though. Like that's the line for me, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I would say this isn't I think it's safe to assume this for both of us. Correct me if I'm wrong. This isn't about you and I being high on Dobbins. It's about us not being high enough on Pacheco and Pickens to pull trigger on something like this. Like in this deal, I view 108 as the centerpiece, not JK Dobbins, which is how I would kind of value JK Dobbins. What picks am I taking over him? And I don't know if I could value Dobbins personally as more than just the 111 or 112 in a 1-for-1 kind of deal. So, yeah, it is what it is. Moving on, we're going to talk about the next guy. He has had a few fantasy relevant seasons, even a fantasy borderline elite season before. David Montgomery, right? We have no idea where he's going to end up. He is currently a free agent. Chicago has, to my knowledge, not extended an offer to bring him back. So no idea where he's going. But Tyler, David Montgomery or pick 205 and a random 24-second.
I'd probably take Monty. I guess at this point in time, I'd probably just take the assets, the 2 seconds, as the 2 trade pieces because they don't have names. But I mean, I still feel like I'm not going to get much better with those picks than David Montgomery. So in my heart, I'm going to say Monty. If I'm planning on being super active with these seconds and blowing up a team, then I'll probably take the seconds.
Yeah, if you're really stuck in a rebuild, I would consider taking the seconds. But in most scenarios, I think I'm taking David Montgomery. If I'm even in the top 2/3 of my league in terms of starting lineup, and David Montgomery can make me just a little bit better, I'm going to take him for that price. There's nothing wrong with Monty. There's nothing obvious that would say he's not going to land as at least a committee back for the 2023 season, right? He's only 25 years old. He's got tons of tread left on the tire. We know he can catch the ball. He's not known for catching the ball, but we know that he can catch the ball. He's an angry runner. Honestly, he's the kind of guy where if Detroit doesn't sign Jamal Williams or if Carolina doesn't bring back Deontay Foreman, I could see David Montgomery going to an offense like that where they do need a bruising back. So I think that his fantasy upside is going to take a bit of a downturn in terms of the first few years that we've seen in Chicago, but not enough to where I would sell him for 2 middling second-round picks. I'm going to take the Monty side in most scenarios here.
There are also a lot of rosters, though, I have to say, that are just overloaded with running backs. And, like, if there's a deal you can get for Monty, then you might as well. There are teams that will have a running back room of, like, Javonte Williams, Alvin Kamara, Dalvin Cook, Monty, and, I don't know, say, like, Elijah Mitchell. So at that point, like, literally you need to sell 2 of those guys for whatever you can get. If you're going to get 2 seconds right away for David Montgomery in that situation, like, that's a running back room where you need to pull the trigger here.
See, and I would say I don't disagree with that, but I would say Monty he's one of my favorite buy low running backs if I'm a contender right now. I mean, I would want to buy him sometime in the next few days before he signs somewhere in free agency. Yeah, you assume a little bit of a risk there, but he's good enough, right? He's good enough to have a prominent role on an NFL team. And Montgomery has really been thrown on the back burner for a lot of dynasty squads, not just going into free agency, but in the last couple of years. For some reason, everybody wants to sell him. Nobody wants to pay up for him. I think while he's currently a free agent is going to be the easiest way you're going to be able to get him. And he's going to be a legitimate RB2 for fantasy purposes, at least for another season, maybe 2 more seasons. And if you need a solid RB2 on your roster for 2 second-round picks, that's perfectly fine. But to your point, if I'm loaded up on running backs and Monty's sitting there as like maybe the RB4, RB5 of my roster, yeah, this is a perfectly fine return. This is one of the few trades that we're going to go over today that I think, depending on team situation, could be kind of a coin toss. I think this is really fair value for Monty. I wouldn't pay, like 205 and the 24 second. That's probably the most I would do. Like maybe I could see myself maybe going up to like the 202 in the 24 second, but probably nothing more than that. But anyway, we'll move on to our next trade here. So I'll go over this one first. I passed it to you first the last 2 times. I know you hate it when I do that too many times in a row. So one side, we have Miles Sanders, currently a free agent, and the Philadelphia Eagles signed Rashad Penny and Boston Scott today. So chances are Sanders will not be an Eagle in 2023. So we have Miles Sanders for Michael Carter and the 204. In this case scenario, I'm going to take Miles Sanders. I'm going to take Miles Sanders. One, I don't think Michael Carter is really anything besides a Breece Hall handcuff. Michael Carter is, in my opinion, kind of a roster clogger unless you are the Breece Hall owner in your in your league. There's nothing wrong with Michael Carter, but it's just that Breece Hall is going to take the workload when he's finally healthy. It's going to take him a few weeks to get fully healthy in 2023, maybe even half the season coming off of that injury. But even when he's not fully healthy, he's still going to be out on the field. He's still going to be I don't even want to say a thorn in Michael Carter's side. Michael Carter's just going to be a thorn in his side until he takes it over. So in my opinion, you're getting a handcuff running back to the running back that you probably don't have. And the 204, as decent as having the 16th overall pick is in a Superflex draft in 2023, It's not enough to get me to give away Miles Sanders, especially coming off of a career high year. I think he's going to end up somewhere. He's going to be one of the higher paid running backs in free agency this year. I have no doubt that he'll land himself in a prominent role in an offense. So give me Miles Sanders in this situation.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest with you, I don't even think if I'm not mistaken, Zonovan Knight was like the running back who replaced Breece Hall at the end of the season last year.
It was Breece Hall and then Michael Carter, and Michael Carter got hurt. Zonovan Knight took over, played really well, and then Michael Carter got healthy. Zonovan Knight kept starting, but Zonovan started sucking, and then it became like this timeshare thing. I don't know. There's Michael Carter he's fun. I liked rooting for him before Breece Hall showed up in that offense. But I mean, dude, like you're the biggest Breece Hall fan that I know. And you know that I'm not nearly as high on Breece Hall as you are. So coming from me saying Michael Carter's borderline useless next to Breece Hall, like he's useless next to Breece Hall.
Yeah, there's nothing to enjoy about that, unless something else happens to Breece, which would be heartbreaking, of course. But then yeah, I don't think the 204 is enough. If you told me it was the 202, I'd probably say yes for Miles Sanders, but it's just outside of the range of where I want to be in that second round. Yeah, it's just not enough. If you could almost give me any other running back in the Michael Carter range, like any other handcuff, even like Alexander Madison, give me Madison and 204 over Sanders, I guess. But yeah, I can't do it for Michael Carter. Yeah, I'm with you.
See, and Michael Carter doesn't move the needle too much. If you're going to take a 1-for-1 for Miles Sanders, now let's assume you're a contender, right? And Miles Sanders could potentially be your team's RB2, right? So you kind of don't want to give him up. What's the sweet spot where you're 100% willing to give him up? I'm not going to ask you if it's a top 8 pick, because after our mock draft the other day, we saw Jahmyr Gibbs fall. We saw Jordan Addison fall, both to that 8 and 9 range. So just looking back at our most recent Superflex mock draft with those landing spots, we had Levis go at 9, Kayshon Boutte, Zach Charbonnet, and Zay Flowers. Those were the other 4 guys in the first round. If somebody offered you as a contender, you're the contender, and you have Miles Sanders, somebody offers you 112 for Miles Sanders straight up in your Superflex league, are you taking that deal?
Not until I see the landing spot. That's a deal that I would just say wait until Miles Sanders signs somewhere, and then we can talk about it. If you finish the top 2 team in your league last year and it's like you're clearly ahead of everyone else, and it's like no thanks. But on almost any other roster, on 80% of rosters in Dynasty, I'm taking the 202, 201.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If I'm one of the top teams in my league, it's going to take probably a top 10 first-round pick to pry him off of me. That's not fair value. That's definitely not fair value. Fair value for Miles Sanders is probably somewhere between 111 and 202. But if you offered me a top 10 pick for Miles Sanders, I'm smashing accept anywhere between 111 and 202. I'm thinking about it. 203 and after, you're going to need to add something better than Michael Carter to get it moving for me personally. But moving on, these next guys, kind of interesting. I wanted to talk about both Ramondre Stevenson and Cam Akers, and they're both showing up in the same trade. So, Tyler, what is your opinion? Ramondre Stevenson and Darius Slayton, or Treylon Burks and Cam Akers?
Akers side. I think that Burks is there's a much bigger gap between Burks and Slayton than there is between Ramondre and Akers. I know a lot of people do really like Ramondre right now, and I don't mind having him on my rosters. I'm comfortable with where I'm at with him. I don't think there's many people who invested in him to be their long-term running back 1. What you invested in him was exactly what you're getting, and you should just be pretty much holding him in those spots. But getting a similar guy in Akers who's also not in a terrible spot, and a second-year receiver in Burks who could just be exploding in value next year, I think that's the way to go. I think Ramondre and Akers are a lot closer than the community is probably valuing them right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. adding Darius Slayton in here is like adding Michael Carter in the other deal, right? Like Darius Slayton, he has his spike weeks. He's going to score 15 to 20 points maybe a few times every fantasy season, but that's it, right? Like he is the boomer bust guy that you fill in as a bye week filler, and that's it. You can't really trust him as anything more than that. So Slayton is not enough for me to turn down the Burks and Akers side here. To your point, I think Cam Akers and Ramondre are a lot closer than the consensus would say. Ramondre is sitting somewhere between RB 13 and 15. Cam Akers is probably like 23 to 25. I am personally low on Cam Akers, and I'm, I guess, kind of okay with the valuation on Ramondre Stevenson. But the gap between RB13 and RB25 in Dynasty right now is not as crazy as it sounds, right? Like there's maybe 2 or 3 tiers within that spot. It's not this gigantic leap down. I think that Cam Akers could face some competition depending on what happens in free agency. I think that Ramondre Stevenson will definitely see competition in New England depending on what happens in free agency or the draft, because New England could draft a running back. And I think Ramondre's 2022 season, I don't want to call it an outlier, but I don't think he's going to see that sort of passing volume moving forward, especially if they do bring in another capable running back. So, in a 1-for-1, I'll take Ramondre over Cam Akers, but Treylon Burks is more than enough for me to close that gap. Very happy with that. You and I are both really high on Treylon Burks here on this channel, and if he can even turn out to be just a top 20 wide receiver, even top 24 wide receiver, I think the Akers and Burks side takes this pretty easily.
I'm with you on that. I mean, that's all it takes, is literally for him to be a wide receiver too, and you got the extra starter, and you maybe sacrificed probably a point or 2 a game over from Ramondre to Akers this year, or however things pan out.
So, and the weird thing is about Ramondre is he's valued all the way up at, like, I don't know, let's just say RB14, right? I checked the consensus a few days ago. I'm pretty sure that's about where he was. So what are you like? What's it going to take for you to trade Ramondre Stevenson in a 1-for-1 draft pick, right? Because we were just talking about Miles Sanders. You said you would probably take the 202. I said that without me asking twice, it would have to be a top 10 pick. Even though Ramondre is significantly higher in my rankings, I would probably take, a very similar return for either one of them. Like I would still smash accept on a top 10 first-round pick. I would still consider it if you offered me 11 or 12. I would still consider it even if you offered me 201 in a super flex draft.
Yeah, I think I'm right in my view. 110 is when I'm just like, I'm not even going to think about it. I'm just going to take the pick and, re-roll this Ramondre train, because I agree with you. I do think not necessarily an outlier. I don't think it was just like a freak accident. I think he's a good football player, but I think it was his ceiling. I don't think Bill Belichick or the Patriots have ever looked at any one running back and thought, we're going to have you here for the next, however many years. But as far as 110 is probably a smash. 112, I'm probably just gonna drag myself to do it and say I'll probably try to trade the pick rather than make the pick. And then after that, if I can get like 201 and random 24 first, or not random 24 first, 201, like, or between 201 and 203, and then like an extra second next year, then I would probably do those as well, like 2 seconds, 1 high-end second, 1 random. I'd probably do it for about that price tag.
Yeah, and I just pulled out the consensus. So Ramondre is 13. Miles Sanders is 23. And that's they're 2 tiers, right? Like tier 3, according to Fantasy Pros consensus, is RB 8 through 16, and then the next one is 17 through 25. Like running backs just have, in my opinion, their value in this offseason is historically low to what we've seen in previous off seasons. And my biggest advice is, honestly, with these running backs, instead of dealing them away right now, unless someone's offering you that top 10 pick, because I'm still more than happy to say that, rather than dealing away running backs right now, wait until the season starts. Because running backs, nobody wants running backs unless it's like an elite guy like Christian McCaffrey or Saquon or Bijan Robinson right in the offseason. But everybody needs running backs when the season starts, and everyone will pay up for running backs when the season starts. So if you have a guy like Ramondre that you want to sell, if you have a guy like Miles Sanders or JK Dobbins, any of these guys that you want to sell, as long as you're convinced that they're not going to get hurt in training camp and they're not going to be hurt by free agency, I would hold on to them, because you shouldn't be selling the Dynasty RB13 for pick 112 overall. But we're both considering it, right? Like it's a weird time of year for Dynasty.
Well, I mean, like you said, like the gap just isn't huge between the RB15 and the RB, freaking 50. Like I'm looking here, like Ramondre scored 14.7 points per game last year. Guess who scored 11 points per game last year? Lat Murray. Like Devin Singletary scored 10.5. Monty again 11. Gibson 11. Jerick McKinnon 11.5. Cordell Patterson 12. Like it's not a big difference whatsoever when it comes to these, RB2 to RB3 range. Like if you can get those extra picks or an extra upside player, then you take it.
And you know why this is? This is because I told you last year, or before the 2022 season started, I told you the workhorse role is a dying role in the NFL. And I think the 2022 season really kind of proved it. Very few guys are quote unquote workhorses in the NFL these days. And the ones that are, it's not even like every single one of them is effective. So just something interesting to think about. The next guy, though, we both like, and he was a full-on workhorse in 2022. Question is, will he do it again in 2023? And it's Josh Jacobs. So are we taking Josh Jacobs in 210 or Donovan Peoples-Jones 106 and 204?
106 DPJ 204 for sure. I think this is exactly why we drafted Josh Jacobs in fifth, sixth round of startups last year, was so we could re-roll him. We know what he is. I know it's tough to sell him on a competing roster like we were talking about before, but I mean, you just have to for the 106, especially in super flex. Like you're getting such a high end prospect, and I mean, Josh Jacobs has his questions. Like it's too much of a return, and you get to move up in the second round too. Like the 210 is pretty irrelevant compared to the 204. The 204 is still a pick and a guy who you're going to know his name, and you're going to, watch him. You're going to look to watch him play football on Sundays, versus the 210 is a guy you're probably just going to have at the bottom of your taxi squad and is not going to do very much for you. So yeah, give me that 106 and DPJ, even though DPJ has nothing to do with why I'm taking this. It probably, if you told me Josh Jacobs in the 210 for just the 106 straight up, I'm still taking that deal.
Yeah, I think DPJ is just kind of the lotto ticket scratch off card that they kind of included in on this. I appreciate the hustle, right? Because I always try, if there's room for it in the trade, and there almost always is, I will try to get an extra 4th round pick or an extra scratch off card, like a guy like DPJ or whatever, just because why not? And when you're selling a commodity like Josh Jacobs, a top 10 or arguably, top 6, top 7 dynasty running back, you deserve to ask for a little bit more. So get your DPJ. But I love what you said about this is why we took Josh Jacobs, because we knew that he was going to produce in 2022. Now, granted, we were both calling him a top 10 running back. We did not expect top 3 production, but we were very happy with it. It's time to sell. It's time to sell. The offense as a whole is no longer run by Derek Carr. It's run by Jimmy G. Grand scheme of things, probably a lateral move. But Derek Carr has been on this team for many, many years. He has a rapport with nearly everyone on that team, and he has for many, many years. You can make the argument, well, they just added Devontae Adams. Yeah, well, they were best friends in college, so irrelevant. Moving to Jimmy G, a brand new quarterback, that's a big deal, right? I think this offense is going to be a bit more flat than it was back in 2022, and that's going to negatively affect Josh Jacobs. I think that he's not going to be a top 3 running back again. There's no way he repeats that. I think it's very well within the realm of possibilities for him to repeat as like the RB9 to RB12 range. I'd still be very happy with that. But this time next year, he's going to be 26. That's when everybody wants to sell off their running backs. He's not an overly elite prospect like McCaffrey, like Barkley, like Jonathan Taylor. He's just a very solid guy that put together a season or a career high season last year, and it's time to capitalize, right? 106, you're looking at worst case scenario, your pick between Jamar Gibbs and Jackson Smith and Jigba. And I'm taking either one of those. I'm taking either one of those guys over Josh Jacobs in a one for, unless I'm like a top 2 team in my league and Josh Jacobs is going to be the reason why I hoist the trophy in 2023. I would easily take Gibbs or JSN over Josh Jacobs straight up, right? In most scenarios. So adding on the 204 and DPJ on top of that, I think it's a no brainer. Really good time to sell Josh Jacobs, and kudos to the owner that made this trade.
Yeah, awesome trade. And the fact that you just called Jamar Gibbs is a really bad look for the channel. You're going one step too far on these mispronunciations here. I know it was just a hiccup. I know you know his name, but I mean, you're killing me.
Got to call me out. Well, in my defense, that is a name that I actually do know. That's just a brain typo, right? But it is what it is. If
like
you have a problem,
brain typo, I like that. Brain typo.
Yeah, brain typo, dude. You can get away with a lot at work if you use that, because everyone's just like, that's kind of cute. Whatever.
I've done that too, I guess, right?
But so last trade of the day, DeAndre Swift. What are we doing with DeAndre Swift? What is going on with DeAndre Swift ahead of 2023? Tyler, I put this one on here, one, because it's one of the trades. So Tyler sent me like 30 trades to sort through before this video, and I hand selected these 6, but I specifically hand selected this one because I like talking about DeAndre Swift and I like trying to figure out what he's worth. So Tyler, DeAndre Swift or a random 2024 first round pick?
Yeah, give me the first. Reroll it. If you asked me that this time last year, I would have probably said, God, no. You have no chance of getting him for just a random 24 first. But, I mean, at this point, I think we've seen enough of what the Lions, think of him and what his role is going to be. And I don't think it's going to be the goal line guy. I don't think he's going to be the between the tackles guy. So it's just, I mean, it might be time. I think if you can buy him cheap, you can buy him for the price of 2 seconds. I would easily do that. But yeah, I mean, I think if you can get a random 24 first, that could potentially turn into a top 5 pick. Like you do that.
Yeah, I agree. It hurts me to say because I am such a big fan of DeAndre Swift, but it's not in the cards for him until he is not with the Lions anymore, and I just don't see that happening. With him being on the last year of his rookie contract, with Jamal Williams potentially walking in free agency, with nothing else going on in that Detroit backfield, I don't see any possible way that Detroit cuts him or tries to trade him. But I also don't see any possible way where they let Swift be a workhorse. Best case scenario for DeAndre Swift is they bring in a guy like Deontay Foreman, or they bring back Jamal Williams or something like that, right? A guy that has a lot of short yard potential, but could still give way to a healthy DeAndre Swift, even in Detroit when DeAndre Swift, for some reason, has been placed in the doghouse by Dan Campbell. So I don't expect Swift to get a workload in 2023. I think if they let Jamal Williams walk, which I don't think they'll let him walk. I think he'll walk on his own if he gets offered a bag in free agency, which he very well could be after scoring 17 touchdowns. If Williams is not on that roster at the start of the NFL draft, I would be damn shocked to see Detroit not take a shot on Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs or even Zach Charbonnet. They will leave the first or second round with a running back. And I don't love that for DeAndre Swift for very obvious reasons. So it's all speculation right now. But nothing, absolutely nothing over the first 3 years of DeAndre Swift's career with Detroit suggests that his workload is going to get any bigger this year, and I'm ready to cash out.
Yeah, so I know you've been trying to sell Swift in a spot or two. So what have you been getting offered? What has he been on the market? What have people been telling you they're willing to send for him?
Well, so I love that you bring that up because earlier I made a trade in our league, actually, and it was focused on DeAndre Swift. And it's a salary cap league, but both of the players had relatively the same salary, so I really wouldn't factor too much into that. But I sent DeAndre Swift, I sent 202, and I sent 209, right? So 2 second-round picks and DeAndre Swift. In return, I got Chicago Bears wide receiver DJ Moore. Feels weird to say it. I am still so sad about that. Can't say it out loud. Panthers fan in me is screaming. Anyway, Chicago Bears wide receiver DJ Moore and a random 2024 first. And at that point, like, to be honest with you, I'm going to take DJ Moore over DeAndre Swift in, I would say, 100% of scenarios going into 2023. And then I would easily trade away 202 and 209 for a first-round pick next year, just because I'm not a big believer in this class anyway. Or at least, I don't want to say not a big believer in the class. I just don't think there's any star power to be had at 202 and 209 that I won't, that I'd be fine with passing up next year's first round for. So that's what I got. I got DJ Moore in a first-round pick for DeAndre Swift in 2 seconds this year.
Yeah, and that's awesome because especially considering they probably will be in a flex spot on your roster. DJ has – DeAndre Swift just put up a career high 208 points or something like that, and that's basically DJ Moore's guarantee each and every year. And I definitely love his spot with Justin Fields a lot more than what he's had in Carolina the last couple. So I'm with you on that. I want to propose one more Swift trade to you other than this 24 first.
All right,
DeAndre Swift or Tony Pollard straight up.
I would probably go with Tony Pollard. I feel bad. I do, because I was a really big fan of DeAndre Swift. And for most of, 2020? For most of the 2020 draft cycle, DeAndre Swift was my clear-cut RB1 of the class. Over Jonathan Taylor, over CEH, over JK Dobbins, over Cam Akers. I was a big DeAndre Swift fan. So it breaks my heart to be selling him for a guy like Tony Pollard, but Pollard did something in 2022 that DeAndre Swift has not been able to do in his first 3 years of his career. And that is, 1, stay healthy, but 2, and most importantly, actually produce like an elite running back. Ezekiel Elliott is staying with Dallas. Tony Pollard is staying with Dallas. If it's going to be more of the same, that's fantastic, because Pollard's going to be an easy top 10 running back. If it's not going to be more of the same, that's only because Pollard is getting an even bigger share because Zeke is kind of washed, right? So I think that Swift's ceiling is very exciting. There's no denying that. I don't think he's hitting that ceiling anytime soon, and it's going to take him a damn good landing spot all the way in 2024 offseason to change anything. So give me Pollard.
Yeah, it's crazy to say, dude. Imagine saying that this time last year. How the tables have turned, and how the turns have tabled.
Yeah, dude, it hurts. It really does, because I'm such a big DeAndre Swift fan. I still believe in the talent, but I mean, dude, by the time he gets out of Detroit, he's going to be 25. And how many running backs truly break out at the age of 25, right? Like,
other than Tony Pollard.
Other than Tony Pollard, exactly.
But I will say he's been better than Zeke for the last 2 or 3 years now, since Zeke went to Cabo, and Jerry Jones just hasn't given him the workload. It just doesn't. He wouldn't allow it with Zeke's contract.
In Pollard's defense, though, Ezekiel Elliott was at one time a premier elite top 3 running back in the entire National Football League. Pollard had a lot to live up to and a lot to compete with when he first came in. Swift was drafted in the 2nd round. And his biggest competition in year 1, I'm pretty sure, was Kerryon Johnson, if I remember correctly, or someone random like that, right? And it's just, I don't know. It's heartbreaking, but it is what it is.
Zeke was the best running back in the league at one point for about 2 to 3 years. He was the best running back in the league. I'll stand by that. But he sucks now. He's awful. He's just a goal line back. He's no better than Jamal Williams, literally.
Okay, man. That's why he got his big contract early, so he didn't have to worry about it anymore. But anyway, that's going to do it for us here on Goal Line Dynasty. Thanks for tuning in, and hopefully we kind of helped you value some of these running backs. I know it's difficult. This is no man's land in the offseason of 2023. This is the offseason of not knowing what the hell to do with our running backs, because the value is all over the place. There's only 2 tiers between RB8 and RB25, which I don't think has ever happened before. There's always been minimum 3 tiers in that range. Most of the time, even 4 tiers in that range. So the fact that it's divided up into just 2 separate lists over a course of 13 running backs is just absolutely wild to me. But hopefully we helped you out a little bit here today, guys. Tyler, before we sign off, any closing remarks for the boys and girls? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, when you're moving laterally between any of the guys that we've talked about, just take the extra picks. Whichever side has the extra picks, the extra assets, you go for that side, and that's always the answer.
Yeah, I completely agree. Tear down when you can, add those draft picks, and hit that like and subscribe button as well. I forgot to set it. I have not said it over the last few videos. I'm assuming that you guys are doing it anyway, and we have received, at least a handful of likes on each of these videos, which we do sincerely appreciate. But hit that like button, hit that subscribe, leave a comment if you think we make a stupid take, or you agree with one of our takes, or if you even have a question, or you want to run a trade by us, we will be more than happy to answer that for you guys. But for myself, for Tyler, for Goal Line Dynasty, we'll see you next time.